Uh, we'll be delivering this material. It's actually divided into, let's say, two main parts lah. Di sini empat sih, tapi in my opinion it's two. It's like basics of speech, and finally how to really use speeches properly and really strategize doing your speeches in an MUN conference. I'll be talking about introduction and strategy, while Tasha will be speaking about the structure and types of speech. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, before that, I just want to give a quick disclaimer. So I think Tasha and I will spend quite a bit of time in the so we'll kind of be talking. We're gonna start off kind of one way, but if you do have any questions in the middle, feel free to stop us. And later, like once we're done presenting, once we're done with questions and answers, I think we'll consider the GT to be formally done. But if you want to stay and kind of do like a quick practice session with Tasha and I, we're open to do that. So basically, you say, anyways, I think.
Just speaking.
Okay, so there's a very simple question. What is a speech? I think everyone kind of knows. Okay, oh yeah, a speech to ada orang ngomong, they deliver points-nya, so on and so forth. But why does this become really important in Model UN? Because basically, the whole idea of Model UN is representing your country. And one of the ways that you do it most often, and one of the ways you can really show what your country stands for, is through your speeches. So it's the expression of your thoughts, of your stance, of your ideas through spoken words. And this is something very important to note. The purpose of your speech is to convey your idea to other people. I'll be talking a bit more about this later in the strategy part. But you really need to be able to brand your speech so that people know it's your idea. And that I think is one of the most fundamental things that can really lead you to getting an award in a Model UN conference. Next slide. Another question, right? How do you prepare for a speech that will resemble your country's stance? I think firstly, what we should ask is, how do you really determine your stance? I think for like a clearer picture, you will really like learn more about this later in the Research 101 class or the Research 101 general training. But I think generally in determining your stance, there's really two ways. Firstly is hard stance, where your stance is 100% clear. So that's to say the topic is LGBT and you get Saudi Arabia, and your stance is very clear that you're against LGBT, but you kind of have to look for the silver linings as to what you're willing to concede and what you're going to keep a hard stance on. And secondly, it's like kind of like soft stances where you're, let's say, a minor nation, you really don't know what you stand for, and there's so many different ways to really find your stance. So an example would be for looking for your stance is, I was Guatemala talking about South China Sea, and you'd probably think like, oh, Guatemala, apa hubungannya sama South China Sea? Then there are ways to really look for, like waktu itu I looked for whether or not Guatemala has diplomatic relations with China. And I kind of based my stance off that. So looking for your stance is something that's very important. And I think that's just a quick insight to how you can find a stance that will properly represent your country. But how do you make a speech that represents your country's stance? The first thing is you have to understand your country. You really have to know what your country stands for, what your country supports, what your country does not support, and caranya gimana, how do you do it? Yeah, like what I said before. And you can really base your stance based on like the laws, the regulations, the conditions in your country. So let's take the issue again of LGBT. Maybe in the last 5 years, the King of Saudi Arabia never issued a statement like, oh yeah, we don't support LGBT. But you can really determine what your country believes in, what your country stands for, based on the laws which exist. Yeah, you can interpret the fact that Saudi Arabia has the death penalty for LGBTQ plus people as the stance of Saudi Arabia being against LGBT. And once you understand your country and you're able to deliver your country's stance, your country's belief with regards to a certain issue, that's already the first point. Secondly, be real. I think being real is related to the first point, but it's so important to note that you come to an MUN conference representing the country. So you have to be real, you have to be as realistic as possible in representing that country. Maksudnya gimana? Again, we take the simplest issue for me, LGBT. You yourself, personally, you might be, let's say, a social justice warrior. You're like a big ally. You support the LGBT movement, but you have to represent Saudi Arabia. You have to be real. You have to represent the country as best as you can. And when you do so, that means, yeah, you kind of put away your personal beliefs during the conference. And I think there are many occasions where you join an MUN and you see a person speaking as themselves and not the country. And that's something that really, I mean, as someone who's shared before, that's kind of a massive turn off lah. Because if your stance is wrong, if you don't represent your country but you represent yourself, that's minus points, because that kind of proves that you really didn't do your research or you're unable to properly represent your country. And you have to know the purpose of your speech, both as a country and as a delegate. What do I mean by this? So obviously in every speech, right, like there's a purpose that you want to convey. As a country, it's going to be the things like, oh, I want to say this so that other countries can agree with me, or I want to propose this solution. And then you think as a country, as the representative of that nation, I say that I want the solution so that the world can be a better place. For example, you really have to know what the purpose of your speech is as a country. Tapi as a delegate, it's also very important. Dalam artian as a delegate ini, as someone who's competing in the MUN. So you have to know kayak, oh, what am I in this speech? I want like to gather people's support. I want to have people support me. I want to have them come to me during the unmoderated caucus. And you really have to know the purpose of each and every speech as the representative of a nation and as a competitor. And I think I'll be talking a bit more about that later when talking about strategizing your speeches. Next slide, please, Tasha. Jadi gini, what makes a great MUN speech? So I mean, in debate, if there's any debaters here, you guys would think a great debate speech is a speech that starts with the global poor all around the world, blah, 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 blah. Bosio speech, right? That's an amazing speech. Tapi, how do you pack such like important, such such, let's say, controversial ideas in 1 or 2 minutes? The most important thing, and I think this is the parameter of a good MUN speech, is that other delegates remember your points. Then remember here has two definitions. Firstly, is that they respond to your points. So for example, you say, the delegate of Ireland believes that we should provide food for all refugees regardless of their sex, gender, race, culture, religion, so on and so forth. If in the next speech, countries start going, this delegate agrees with the delegate of Ireland. Or even if the country starts going, this delegate believes that the delegate of Ireland's solution is ineffective. If your name is continuously mentioned in the debate, that's a plus point for a great MUN speech. The second metric for this point would be kind of like people legit, the definition of remember is literal here, in the sense that, in the next unmod, people will actually start coming to you like, you're the one that said about this, right? You're the one who proposed a solution about alleviating poverty, right? When you get that type of attention, when delegates remember your speeches or your points, then you're in a good place. Like you're on track for an award, I would say. But secondly, right, revive the council and or drive the debate forward. What do I mean by this? Jadi for example, there's the topic is poverty. And you already talked about the definition of poverty for, let's say, for like 3 unmoderated caucuses. It's a dead end. regardless of how good your speech is, regardless of how amazing your points, your I would say your manner, the way you speak it, like even if your speech can make people cry, tapi you don't drive the debate forward. You just keep talking about the same thing over and over again. You don't bring new solutions. You just keep talking and you don't move the debate forward. You keep talking about the same thing. At the end of the day, that's not a great MUN speech because an MUN conference, it's a marathon. I think it's you have to it's a journey that you really have to see gitu loh. Kayak, ya udah, once you talk about definition, then you have to talk about ways to set a legal definition. Then you're gonna have to talk about ways to alleviate poverty. If you just keep talking about one thing, the marathon, this journey in the MUN conference, doesn't really move forward. And when that happens, regardless of how good your speech is, it's not very effective. And I would personally say it's not a great MUN speech. Next slide, Tasha.
Okay, I think this is my part. So right now we're going to talk about the structure of speech that is commonly used in MUN. So the first structure that I would say I personally use a lot is the HPS. So the HPS structure comes in handy when you're trying to deliver generic speeches. For example, the GSL or the General Speakers List. So the purpose of a HPS kind of speech is to make sure that you're able to deliver certain problems that and you can actually get the delegates' attention towards that problem, and you can also deliver or propose the solution that you're trying to deliver, that you're trying to propose. So it is a way to open up people's mind towards the actual problem that is going on in regards to the topic, and therefore you can actually serve your solution as the answer to that problem. So it is kind of a way to actually promote your solution. So basically the HPS consists of hook, problem, and solution. When we're talking about hook, hook is, well, basically is it's a way to grab people's attention. So in MUN, I cannot deny that MUN sometimes can be really boring. You hear people repeating maybe the same thing over and over again. And therefore, when you're trying to convey your speech, when you're trying to deliver your speech, it is very important to first actually grab these people attention so they actually will listen to what you're trying to say. And that attention can be grabbed with the use of hook. So basically, in delivering your hooks, you can use either quotes from famous figures, you can use metaphor, rhetorical questions, description, play on words, or even just throw out very interesting statistics about the topic that you're trying to say. So let's say in the topic of stunting, you can simply say that, well, I know that it is not the right statistic, but for example, 1 in 5 kids are stunted or things like that. So you can actually throw on these simple facts that can actually grab people attention, makes them think, oh, the problem of stunting is that big. Okay, so here we also provide an example of how a hook can be used. So I will just read it. Imagine living in a nice house with floors made of marble, but somehow you're forced to live in the basement. This is the stark reality of the lives of Papuans in Indonesia. So, through this speech, you don't directly go into the points that you're trying to convey, but you actually give a very interesting opening. You say that Papuans in Indonesia live in a very, very rich area of the country, but sadly, they are even the people who have who actually enjoy the least amount of welfare of prosperity, which is very, very ironic. So you deliver it this way instead of just simply saying Papuans in Indonesia live miserably. So when you deliver something with a very catchy way, it will actually grab people's attention and make your speech more memorable. So after you deliver your hook, you will carry on to delivering your arguments, or in the HBS structure, it's called the problems. So here is where you actually state your main points, your problem analysis, your arguments. So in the case of the whole Papua speech, you will say that the case of Papua, in the case of Papua, the main problem is the racism and the discrimination that they're facing, and how people are trying to only exploit their natural resources without even thinking about their rights as citizens of Indonesia. So yeah, basically that's the problem. That is where you state come with a solution. So in MUN, it is a very common practice to brand your solution. Here we give an example of the solution called PEPC, or Provision of Education for Papuan Citizen, blah blah blah. So basically, as what Derek has mentioned before, it is very important to make your ideas memorable. And one of the ideas that chairs pay most attention to is solution. So when you brand your solution with fancy or funny names, then it will become more memorable to people and will be more likely to be echoed and echoed throughout the discussion. So let's say other delegates may mention that this delegate agrees with the Pepsi solution delivered by the delegate of blah, blah, blah. And with that being said, chairs will notice that your solution actually has a big impact in the council because it is repeated over and over again. So basically, it is just kind of like a pro tip, a hack to make your solution more memorable, to actually build your influence within the council. So basically, if we're talking about the structure of speech, this is one of the most common: hook, problem, and solution. And I would say that this kind of structure is very common to be used in general speakers list. Okay, next point. So this is the second structure, the RL. Maybe there are several debaters here. I don't really know, but if there are debaters, you guys may be very familiar to this kind of structure. So basically, RL consists of assertion, reasoning, evidence, and link back. So what an assertion is basically a statement. Jadi kayak kalimat pernyataan gitu. So you actually state your problem or your argument within a very concise very concise statement lah. For example, in the case of that whole Papua speech, you say that Papua citizens must be provided with quality education. That is your argument, packed in a very simple statement. And after you give your assertion, you will continue with reasonings as to why your assertions or why the statement that you just made is actually valid. So here the reasoning is that quality education can help increase human development and so on and so forth. So basically in MUN, you also want to make sure that the reasoning is also concise enough. Well, in debating, you're given like 7 minutes to convey your assertions and give elaborative reasoning. However, in MUN, you're only given 1 to 1.5 minutes, and therefore you need to be concise as possible. So with that being said, one of the tendency of give reasonings to their reasonings. So I will say that after you say that Papua citizens must be provided with quality education, you will say that quality education can increase human development. I think that is pretty concise, and that is actually enough in the context of MUN. However, MUNers usually have the tendency to explain their reasoning, which makes their whole speech kind of repetitive and will go on round and round and round, and actually won't actually finish the whole arguments or the whole points that they're actually planning to say. So basically, it is very wise. It is wise to just state your assertion, deliver a concise reasoning, and carry on to the rest of your speech, which is the evidence and the link back. So for evidence, basically it is cases that can support your argument. So in this context, in this whole Papua speech example, we can actually give a reference of the educational programs that have worked in other countries as our main evidence of showing the council can actually work because it has worked in other countries before. And after you give an evidence, you will have to give a link back. So basically, it is a way to wrap up your argument and, well, kind of strengthened your assertion that, well, after this reasoning, after this evidence, all in all, the assertion is right, and Papuan people can actually be better off with better quality education. And so I think that's all for the RL, for the basic structure of speech. And other thing that I want to add is that the RL is usually used in moderated caucus instead of in GSL. So you don't actually come to the MUN conference with an RL structure kind of speech. So in an RL structure, you don't actually have the opportunity to actually deliver some kind of solution. However, that solution can be delivered through the HPS kind of speech. So I will probably say that the RL is better be used in moderate caucus when the discussions are already happening, when you have already stated your solutions. And well, this can also be used to rebut other delegates. And yeah, I think that's about it. Okay, so maybe another point, another tip that I think is very important in MUN is that due to the very restricted amount of time, 1 until 2 minute speaking time, I will say that it is not really wise to deliver more than 2 points in one speech. So that is to say that you may have to eliminate certain arguments that you don't think is strong enough to be delivered to the council. So let's say that there are a lot of delegates that say things that may trigger you to give them rebuttals within your speech. However, you may want to identify all those rebuttals and all the arguments that you're trying to say that you are planning to deliver in your future speech and actually select the one that is the strongest and will actually insert your influence within the council. So yeah, I think that's all for the structure of speech, HPS, assertion, and make sure that you don't deliver more than three arguments at once.
Can I just quickly jump in a bit? Uh, so like back with the RL, right? So I think I really do agree with Tasha that RL is mostly used when there's something being debated upon. But one thing that I think is important is that these two types of speeches, these two apa sih namanya? Format lah, atau these two types structure of speeches, they're not really mutually exclusive. So that's to say, you can have RL as part of your HPS speech. So like, for example, the whole Papua speech, by the way, I reused that from a general training past when Papuan Lives Matter was like a really big thing. So I'm sorry if the topic seems out of date, but it was the hype back then. Tapi gini, simple na. You already have a beautiful HPS speech. You already like people are already listening to you because like your hook was so amazing. Like, oh my god, I have to listen to the speech. What is it about this house and living in the basement? You already delivered your points. You already say, oh, the people in Papua are not being treated well. Then you propose your solution. You have to notice that your solutions in an MUN is in a way also an argument. You have to argue for why your solution needs to work. Kan? So like the RL example I was given, Papuan citizens must be provided with good education. That's some sort of a solution. Then you provide a reasoning for why your solution needs to be done. What will be the impact of your solution? When you can prove the impact and you can kind of like show the relation, okay, just a quick process analysis. Or if they're educated, artinya they have the ability, if they have the ability, they can govern themselves. And when that happens, that's good because apa? That's RL kan? If you elaborate your solutions in an RL format, yeah, people tend to believe your solutions even more because you've provided reasonings and elaborations why as to why it will work.
Mm. Okay, thank you, Derek. Okay, actually that kind of sparks some thoughts in my head. Gue jadi kayak inget gitu. So basically, I did mention that one of the way that you can strengthen your argument or solution is to give examples, right? As to how this type of solution has worked in other countries. But I will personally say that that kind of argumentations to defend your solution is the weakest kind of argumentations. So in the sense that you only mention how this worked in other countries without actually contextualizing that in your country. So I will say that certain solutions may work in, let's say, okay, let's take an example. An online educational platform may work in United States, may work in UK, but that does not mean that that kind of solution will work in countries like Burundi or, well, countries without really good technology or online infrastructure. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that it is better for you to strengthen your arguments with what Derek has mentioned before, like a train of thoughts, a train of logic of how it can actually work in your countries. It can be better strengthened with the use of evidence, but, well, evidence is not enough without proper contextualization or proper train of logic that complement your argumentations or solutions. Okay, I think that's all. Okay, Derek, you can continue with the types of speech. I think this is also my part. Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
basically, I'm very sorry. So in MUN, there are three types of speech that are very commonly used. The first one is called the lawyer style. The second one is the preacher style, and the third one is salesman style. So basically, the lawyer style, the gaya pengacara in delivering your speech, it is often used to do rebuttals or to convey strong argumentations or points. So in a lawyer, there are two characteristics that is very, very prominent. The first one is that you defend a case using logic or facts, using statistics. So you're using hard data to tackle other people's argumentations, or simply to introduce a new one. And the second one is that you usually use it to argue. So that is to say that you want to introduce a new assertions, and you're trying to argue as to why it is correct or why it is valid. Or maybe you can use it to show how your solution will work. So basically, the type of lawyer kind of style is usually more heavy in data and also logics. So the second type of style, second speech delivery style, is the preacher. And the main character of a preacher style is that it often uses characterizations and rhetoric. So that is to say, you may ask people, for example, I will just give an example. Imagine that you're living in a basement. So basically, you're kind of inviting people to feel certain emotions through your speech, and that I would say can be classified as a preacher style of speech. So in a preacher style of speech, you will try to instill certain emotions to other delegates through your speech. You may ask questions. You may use like repetitive statement to like strengthen your arguments. Well, basically, it is like how a preacher will preach. Okay. Oh yeah. Basically, it is. I think I forgot a very very important point of this whole style is that these styles are different for every delegate. So let's say that certain delegates may be more comfortable to use the preacher style or maybe the salesman style. However, these kind of styles are not really exclusive. So it is not to say that, well, I usually use preacher style and I'm a preacher style MUNer, so I won't use other types of speech. No, you can actually utilize these, all of these styles and actually give it, kaya use it properly to serve different kind of purposes. However, there's a tendency where if you're already comfortable with a preacher style of doing a speech, then you will actually continue using the preacher style. And I would say that that is really, really okay. Okay, so the last style of the speech delivery is the salesman, is the, apa ya? What's salesman called? Penjual? Uh,
SPG,
SPG. Oh yeah, SPG. So basically,
SPG, SPG.
this is used to promote certain solutions or to promote certain ideas. You want to come off as cheerful, as persuasive, and yeah, it's basically mostly used to promote your ideas. So a very, very important point in delivering a salesman speech is that you have to really, really understand the technicalities or like the specs of your solution. So in salesman speech, you usually will kind of compare the solution delivered by other delegates and the solutions that you have. And you will explain why your solution is better. So basically, it's just like selling a car. You want to argue why this car is better than the car that the other salesmen are trying to sell. So yeah, a very, very important point is that you have to be profoundly aware of what your solution is, how it works, the technicalities, and what is really the selling point of your solution. Okay, I think that's all. And in addition to all that, maybe I will kind of give like a wrap up, is that the lawyer style of speech is mostly used to rebut other delegates. The preacher types of speech, I think it is very, very wise to use it as your first speech. So when you enter the council, you want to attract people's attention, you do a preacher style of speech because it can instill emotions, it can grab people's attention. I think it's very, very, very effective for that kind of purposes. And the last one is the salesman speech. You use it to compare solutions. And it is very, very effective to use this style of speech in the discussion of working paper, or in the discussion of draft resolution. So you're trying to compare solutions and trying to promote, trying to make people believe that your solution is actually better. Is there like any additional information that there's want to give, or we
I think
can?
I just want to give an example. I think it's much easier to imagine. I think
Okay.
Tasha described it very well. Tapi gini, a lawyer speech. Well, what does a lawyer usually do? They protect clients. So they're like, my client is not guilty because then he provides the facts. He provides the logic. Oh yeah, when the murder happened, she was not at home. She was at home. That proves that she didn't do it. So it's very using logic. And lawyers juga attack people. Kayak kalau kalian pernah nonton, if you guys ever watch Suits, it's like, Mrs. Bowen, were you at home during the time of the murder? You can really use it to ask questions, kind of get people to speak out what their country's real stance is. I think that's an example. Preacher. Ini contohnya is a very muscular, handsome, I think Christian preacher, right? Tapi let's contextualize it to Indonesia. Do you guys know how? Oh, this is a very bad example. Do you guys know how Habib Rizik speaks in front of the Masa 212? You guys know, right? He goes like, oh yeah, ayo kita bunuh Ahok, for example. Tapi does he ever provide any data? Does he ever provide like data, oh Ahok kinerjanya buruk, nih 21% banjir di Jakarta naik, blah, 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 blah. Enggak, he never does that. Why? Because all he wants to do is to make people feel something, and they want, based on that feeling, to agree with whatever he's saying. So preacher speech is really based on that emotion you feel. Kayak, oh, benar juga nih orang, gue mau percaya juga sama nih orang. That's the preacher type of speech. Salesman. Have you ever been to a mall yang ada mas-mas wulingnya? Yang kayak, mas dilihat mbak dilihat ini wuling almasnya, ini ada screennya 10 inci. Well, what do they talk to you about? Coba, can someone tell me, kalau didatengin sama salesman mobil, mereka tuh ngomongin apa sih? Coba anyone just unmute quickly.
Interesting facts.
Bener, interesting facts. They don't come up to you like, can you imagine what it feels like to ride in a car that has AC? Ya enggak, because every car has AC. And they don't tell you either, like, you know, if you have a car, if you have this car, you can go faster compared to riding a train. No, they don't use logic either. They try to sell you the interesting points. Oh, this car, ini multimedia systemnya, you can speak to it loh. Halo Wuling, halo, kayak all that type of things. Dan pada akhirnya, in an MUN, in the context of an MUN, it's about your solution. Ya udah, you provide, your solution is provide education. Ya semua negara juga mau, every country wants to provide education. But what technicality of your solution is interesting and sets you apart? I think that'd be the easy example. By the way, sorry, if I speak too fast, I tend to be like quite excited when I'm talking about this. I'm also like preacher type of person, and I tend to speak very quickly. So I think karena we're like halfway through the presentation. I think, do you want to open for questions first, Tash? If there's any questions now.
Yeah, sure.
Just feel free to unmute. Jujur ini santai aja guys, kalian mau nanya bahasa Indonesia, kalian just like santai aja.
Boleh.
Kak, aku izin nanya boleh kan?
Iya, boleh banget.
Boleh.
Aku mau nanya soal hook-nya itu kayak, itu biasanya kayak biasa aja, as in kayak pendek, atau kalau kayak panjang dikit gitu, itu juga nggak apa-apa gitu.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sip. Do you wanna like answer first or gimana, Der?
Lu aja Tas, nanti I'll add on to
Okay.
whatever
Guys,
you
gue
explain.
duluan ya, sholat sama beres-beres.
Okay.
Oh ya, sama ini klaim host per, jangan lupa.
Okay. Okay, so
Silakan.
maybe I will answer. So for hooks, personally, I set like a time limit of delivering hooks. So for me, it is 20 seconds. So I would deliver hooks longer than 20 seconds. I think like that is the maximum amount of time you can spend on hook. And panjang atau enggak, sebenarnya it depends. I think kayak certain hooks that are more complicated, I think needs to be kind of like explained a bit. Tapi kayak misalkan kayak basement tadi, the contoh of basement and how the Papuans live in a very very rich area, but they are being put in the basement gitu, live poorly. Dan itu tuh kayak, I mean, that is kind of like apa ya? Itu kayak menggunakan analogi kan, and I think that may need to be explained a little bit, that kind of analogy, but yeah, kayak sebenarnya panjang atau enggaknya it really depends on the analogy that you use, the data that you use. For example, if you use statistic, I don't think that it needs to be further elaborated, or like let's say 50% of people in Burundi doesn't have proper education. So I don't think that really needs any further elaboration, and you can stop there. So it won't take more than 5 seconds. But if you are trying to use more complex hooks that are more attention grabbing, you may need to give a little bit of explanation. But keep in mind that if your hooks require too much explanation, it may not be a really great hook after all, because people may get confused when first hearing it. So make sure that your hook is attention grabbing, but in a way, it does not really confuse people that much. And the time limit is maybe 20 seconds. You can spend maximum on hook. Mhm. Do you have like additional?
No, I think Tasha gave a very good explanation. Tapi maybe I'd like to kind of shine a light on a new perspective. So besides hook, there's also this thing that's being increasingly common, and it's basically the use of buzzwords, or like you kind of make your speech a whole story. So for example, okay, you can start off your speech with uh, a 12-year-old girl named Tasha Salencia has not eaten for 2 months because of whatever, and she's facing malnutrition. That's your hook. Then you bring all the important points. Okay, oh yeah, malnutrition is an important problem. Blah 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 blah. You bring your solution. Oh yeah, our solution is funding through investments for so that people have sufficient nutrition. And you can end your speech with, after all, this solution will allow Tasha Salencia to not be malnourished after all. So it's kind of like you can link the ending of your speech to your hook. And I think when you do that, it becomes a big plus point. See?
Yeah, I really like that type of speech. Yeah, you constantly use the same thing kayak, to first kayak, start your speech and end your speech also on the same thing. But I think I have like an additional example there kayak, I think aside from using buzzwords or like common hooks, you can use like the template. So this is actually very, very common in the MUN circuit. You may, for those of you who have participated in MUN, you may have encountered this type of speech. One of the example is the T speech. So so the T speech is basically you end all of your statements using using T. So maybe let's come together and make our country reach prosperity, because in that way we can ensure that all people live joyfully or something like that. So you end your speech with like the same rhymes. And yeah, I think it's kind of catchy, especially for council that is already getting very very like saturated, very very boring. You may use that to like freshen up the mood. Then again, one of the there are two types of purpose in delivering your speech. It may be your purpose as a country and your purpose as a delegate. And to entertain the council, it serves as a purpose for you as a delegate. Yeah, so I think that's all. That's very does it answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Are there any other questions? So, sorry, I think Tasha and I we get very excited. Like we love MUN, right? MUN is FUN. Are there any other questions, or else we'll move on? Okay, going once.
Halo Kak,
Twice.
aku mau nanya.
Oke, sure.
Oke, boleh.
Siapa tuh?
Oke, Amara. Jadi pertama minta maaf kalau misalnya ini udah dibahas, soalnya tadi sempat keluar-keluar. Tapi aku mau nanya lebih lanjut tentang solutions, terutama buat negara-negara yang mungkin belum berperan aktif di internasional atau bahkan di negaranya aja belum terlalu banyak solusi untuk masalah yang dibahas. Itu apa rekomendasi kakak? Kayak apa yang ditaruh di solusi itu? Kayak berdasarkan apa yang menjadi pandangan negara tersebut, atau mungkin kayak negara mengambil contoh negara lain yang sepandangan tapi udah bekerja dan berkarya, atau gimana ya Kak? Thank you.
Okay. Derek, do you wanna answer first?
Jangan lempar ke gua lah, Tas, pertanyaan susah. Do you want to answer first or
Okay.
gimana?
Thank you so much, Amara, for the question. So actually, it does not necessarily fall into the material of speech. It is more in the field of research, I will say. But I think the tip from me is that for countries who are really, really irrelevant, for example, South Sudan, in the case of like Industrial Revolution 4.0, certainly obviously they have like no influence in teknologi apa-apa because they themselves have their own struggles, right? Mereka bahkan berkesusahan to like fulfill the basic necessities of their people, let alone focusing on industrial revolution. But in that sense, these countries can actually play as victim. So in your speech, you can repeatedly say that, oh, we cannot afford this, we cannot blah, 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 blah. You just play victim. And as for the solution, you can just simply say that I think one of the easiest way is to bring up funding. So you say that your country does not have enough funding. Therefore, you want other countries to help you to blah, 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 capacity building. I think it is a very, very popular solution for countries who are kind of irrelevant or don't have the capacity to actually speak within the topic. So capacity building tuh kayak apa ya? Kayak dibantuin sama developed countries to build maybe like a research and development center and those kind of things. So yeah, I think kayak the most famous solution is funding because funding applies to like almost all topics. And second of all is capacity building. Yeah, I think that's all. Tapi kayaknya this only answers for like poor countries or like underdeveloped countries ya. Derek, do you have like any suggestion for like countries?
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me share screen. Okay.
Okay.
Jadi, I think one thing you first need to notice is one thing you need to keep in mind is that the UN, maksudnya in principle ya, itu memberi semua negara, gives every country one vote. And that means that every country has the same right, regardless of economic conditions, to propose solutions, to speak up, to ask for help, so on and so forth. So even though it might seem that factually you're disadvantaged because of your economic state, that doesn't mean that you cannot propose solutions for the world, basically. Karena in principle, the UN allows everyone to propose solutions. I think specifically to strategy, what should you do if you're a poor country talking about Industrial Revolution 4.0? I think this is what I like to call the, sebenarnya nggak usah gambar juga sih, gue ngide doang mau gambar. So you can
like
propose.
Screen?
Kelihatan nggak sih?
I think I still share my screen there. That way. Okay. So I think the most strategic way to go through such an issue would be to propose tiered solution. So that's to say, you put di sini underdeveloped, developing, nggak usah share screen deh. So I think the most strategic way to go around it is to bring out like tiered solution. Jadi you can say, oh yeah, South Sudan, as everyone knows, is an underdeveloped country. We don't have the resources, but that's why we propose a tiered solution. Dalam artian, so the lowest tier is underdeveloped countries proven by
let's say economic growth which is very limited, terus you prove that South Sudan itu termasuk yang underdeveloped, then you propose solution apa? Lo bisa bawa solution yang kayak yang Tasha ngomong, oh yeah, the solution for these underdeveloped countries is funding and capacity building. But South Sudan recognizes that there are also countries that already have the capacity. So for these countries, we propose that there should be a regulation with regards to Industrial Revolution 4.0. And finally, for developed countries, we think that besides regulation, there should also be the obligation to invest in smaller countries. Jadi kayak you kill two birds with one stone gitu loh, kayak you tackle the issue in your country, tapi lo juga bawa solusi buat negara-negara besar by giving them regulation, by giving them obligations to help you. Stance lo masuk council, namanya Industrial Revolution 4.0 ya, South Sudan. Stance lo masuk council, lo sebagai Sudan lo maunya apa? Lo mau take part in the fourth industrial revolution kan? Lo nggak mau tertinggal-tinggal banget. That's your goal in the conference. Ya, lo bisa bawa solusi itu melalui South Sudan nih, we're so poor, invest in us. And we think that it should be an obligation for bigger and more developed countries to invest, gitu sih. I hope that answers your question. I do agree with Tasha. No, I personally think it's a very, very tough question. And it's very case by case lah. Kayak, yaudah mungkin kalau ngomongin hal-hal ekonomi, this is the solution you can bring. But if you talk about security, for example, kayak South China Sea, terus you got like Peru, kan jauh banget, geographically nggak deket, it's not a superpower country. Yeah, there's another way to really strategize it. But that's a case per case basis. So I'm gonna open, if you have any other questions specific to a topic, feel free to, I think, contact me or Tasha and we can kind of help you out more specifically dan lebih luang lah daripada di GT gini.
Oke, Kak, thank you for the answer.
Yeah, sure, Amara, sama-sama. Okay.
Any other questions before we move on?
Halo Kak Derek, Kak Tasya, aku mau nanya suara aku kedengeran gak?
Iya, kedengeran.
Jadi ini sebenarnya pertanyaan yang dari kemarin tuh emang aku penasaran gitu for speech. Misalnya kayak kita lagi bahas topiknya tuh tentang sesuatu misalkan kayak Black Lives Matter or Everyone's Lives Matter kayak gitu. Terus misalnya aku dapat Amerika atau USA atau negara di Europe gitu yang emang kan dia punya pengaruh besar terhadap topik itu. Sebenarnya itu kind of challenging gak sih buat kita atau cheers-nya itu bakalan lebih dengar tentang resolusi kita atau argumen kita karena kan ibaratnya sebagai country yang punya peran penting gitu terhadap topik itu. Atau itu cuman kayak sebagai opportunity buat kita supaya kita bisa come with a good resolution. Thank you Kak Derek dan Kak Tasya.
Oke, thank you. Salwa ya?
Iya, Vila.
Oke. Sip. Oke, I think gue nggak bakal kayak nanya Derek. Lu mau jawab duluan ya? Karena tadi gue kayak
I'll take this one, it's okay.
Oh, oke.
So gini sih, again, it's a very case per case basis, tapi this kind of really relates to the strategy that you want to come entering into the council. So I think one of my favorite examples tuh, my friend Kathleen, dia pernah turun di Human Rights Council, topiknya Civil Rights of Minorities, terus kayak case study-nya tuh semua tentang Uyghur. Kan as China, you're kind of like, oh my God, what do I do? So I think in that case, what you can do is you need to have a really hard stance in the beginning. Kayak in a way, you can just, belaga gila and just say, China does not have any human rights violations in our country. Then you provide justifications. And you can provide justification, the Uyghurs, they're not having their human rights violated, but rather it's a way of culture, tradition, we're really helping them, so on and so forth, even though that might not necessarily be true. That's the first point I'd like to say about, let's say, state-sanctioned issue. With the issue you gave, I think it's important to note and to be able to differentiate antara violation yang dibuat sama negara sama violation yang dibuat sama masyarakat dalam negara. So non-state sanctioned discrimination. Okay, the issue you gave, the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, I think we're all aware of the fact that Trump is a relatively racist guy lah. He's a pretty racist president. Tapi pada akhirnya dia nggak punya policy yang secara langsung mengatakan kayak we should all African Americans should be treated like very badly. So that's to say that the killing of George Floyd was not something that was done by the state. And if it's not something that's done by the state, artinya lo masih aman untuk bawa stance negara lo sebagai negara yang anti rasisme. You can still say the USA is a country where all men are free and equal. The killing of George Floyd was was done by an authority that's not sanctioned by the state, and we condemn that action. I think that's a benefit if the discrimination is not state sanctioned. So I think those are generally the two ways you can go through with controversial issues. Tapi like Amara's case, it's very case per case sih. Karena ini udah masuk ke strategi ngedele di council.
Okay. Maybe like I want to add something. So tadi Salwa was also asking kayak, is this beneficial or is this like even bikin lebih susah gitu ngedele kalau misalkan dapat negara-negara yang important. So like a little bit of secret like ini kayak mau nge-spill aja gitu kalian. So basically kayak in MUNs, usually delegates that are more experienced are usually given or allocated to countries that are big players. So countries yang emang influential. So kalau nggak influential in the way that mereka P5 kayak USA, France, China, or like other big countries, they're usually given very, very challenging positions. So kayak bisa aja countries that are not really, really relevant to the topic. However, in being given these countries, kayak kalian tuh bakal punya a benefit actually. Kalau misalkan kalian bisa utilize it well. So as mentioned by Derek before, kayak in the case of like China gitu, Uyghur, I think kalau misalkan kalian kayak datang council and you guys say that China has no human rights violation, but you actually cannot give valid justifications as to why that statement is true, I think it is very harmful to you. The chairs will think kayak, ya ampun, ini Dele very, very dumbo, dia bahkan gak nyadar kalau negara dia tuh has so much human rights violation gitu. I think itu harmful if you cannot give adequate justification. But if you can, it will be very, very, very valuable to you lah. Chairnya pasti notice kayak, wow, this delegate is kayak so smart, they can give justification, they can defend even like very, very hard stances that are hard to protect. So I think it can be beneficial if you can use it to leverage your position in the council. Tapi it is definitely very challenging and will requires much more research and comparison to like negara-negara yang don't really have hard stances. I think that is the answer. Okay. Does that answer your question, Salwa?
Yes. Thank you so much, Kak Derek dan Kak Tasya.
Okay.
No worries. I think kita lanjut dulu ya, masih ada beberapa slide, then you can ask a bit more later. I'll be quick sih, because I think this relatively becomes, it's kind of on the advanced kayak, it's not really the basics of speech, but I think it's something that all delegates should be aware of. Moderated caucus, you have to know two things first. Kayak kan moderated caucus tuh buat yang belum pernah MUN, itu bakal ditanya, would you like to speak first or last? Or kan lo you'll be asked to raise your placards. It's important to know when will it be strategic for you to speak. Dalam artian, you need to know the motion and you need to know your role in the topic. For example, let's take the case of China and Uyghur again. For example, the motion that's being discussed is about human rights violations in Xinjiang province. Yeah, strategically, you can either choose, China is the main person discussing the motion. Yeah, you can either choose to be first. You have to know the consequences. If you're first, you can make a big statement like, oh yeah, this is re-education, it's not violating human rights. You make a strong stance. Tapi the 9 other speakers will probably like talk really bad stuff about you. oh, it's not re-education, it's human rights violation, it's concentration camp. And if if the speakers list is already full, yeah, you won't be able to defend yourself, right? Sedangkan if you speak last, ya udah, in a way lo diomonginnya di depan, then you can still give rebuttals. So in a way, it's more strategic to speak last in such motions. So it's important to know when is it strategic to speak. And you also need to know, kayak first speaker tuh ngapain. Like if you're the first speaker in a moderated caucus, yeah, you make solutions, you bring up kayak apa sih yang bisa diomongin, apa sih tujuan dari moderated caucus ini, sisi ini ngomongin apa, sisi B ngomongin apa. You kind of start the conversation, like you start the debate. In the middle, it's important, and this is something many delegates miss, is you have to respond to previous delegates. So I think a problem, not a problem, it's a common thing that happens in MUN is, oh, you're already listed in the speakers list. You prepare a speech, you really focus on preparing your speech. You don't listen to what other delegates are speaking. Dalam artian, so mamanya motionnya tuh, let me think ya. For example, the motion is ways to tackle poverty. Let's say lo speaker ke-6, you prepare your speech. You already thought your speech is about investment. Tapi all 6 people have already talked about investment. You have another point you want to bring. So instead of focusing on writing your speech doang, you can respond, oh, this delegate agrees with the idea of investment. Maybe you can give comments, oh yeah, tapi the investment shouldn't be done like this. Then you can bring your new points juga. Jadi jangan cuman literally say whatever you prepared, but it's important to respond to previous speakers. Finally, you also need to respond to last speaker, juga kayak you respond to contentions, tapi it's very good if you can conclude the motion. So kayak, oh yeah, at the end of the day, we have two different sides and with 2 different solutions. We think that this should be further discussed in a moderated caucus or unmoderated caucus. So you kind of provide, selama 10 speakers ini kita udah ngomongin apa sih? And that way the chairs will really notice you because they see you as the person that really understands what's going on. Gitu sih. Next slide. Consultation of the whole. Jadi consultation of the whole, it's basically passing the ball. So I propose a 20-minute consultation of the whole. There's no speaking time. When I'm done speaking, I can pick whoever I want to speak. So I pick Tasha then can pick Amara can pick Savannah can pick Fila. It just goes on. Jadi consultation of the whole too, strategically, yeah, you kind of try to understand what the council wants. Karena kan ini directly ngomong ya, nggak ada chairs moderate. Yeah, you can say something and you can hear people's response, then you can see how controversial or how well accepted your point is or your solution is in the council. Karena you'll have a direct response. Tapi on the other hand, you can also give questions yang more directed. Karena kayak you can pick who speaks next. So mamanya, Uyghur lagi, China is not listed in the moderated caucus. Tapi your whole speech is questions kayak, how is this re-education? How is this not human rights violations? Kalau China-nya not listed in that moderated caucus, you're not going to get an answer juga. Tapi in a consultation of the whole, you can pick the next speaker and you can kind of for sure get an answer, right? It's also strategic but give preemptive, so kind of like prepare rebuttals. Jadi kayak lo tahu orang lain tuh bakal attack solusi lo di sini. Ya udah lo ngomong kayak, even if they say this, kenapa? And finally, don't spend too much time. Kayak like what I said, consultation of the whole tuh bisa 20 menit. And in terms of procedure, lo mau ngomong 20 menit tuh juga boleh. You can speak for as long as you want. Tapi just be strategic. Don't spend too much time. Next slide, please. Debate on draft resolution working paper. Kalau udah ngomongin working paper or draft resolution, kan you kind of have to compare and contrast. Many people tend to attack. Jadi kayak semuanya ada solusi yang mereka nggak suka. Mereka ngomong kayak, oh, this solution is dumb. The solution will not work. A better way to put it is, can the delegate explain why they would like the investment to be done in foreign direct investment as compared to through blah, 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 blah. When you do that, yeah, the chairs or other delegates can see, oh, you're attacking, tapi it comes out in a more diplomatic manner. And you should also link back to your solutions. So after asking questions, kayak, oh yeah, this why do you want the investments to be done in this way? This delegate already proposed a solution also relating to funding, but we prefer funding to be done by governments themselves through the state budget. So remember that in MUN, what matters is how good your solutions are. Jadi you have to link uh, attacking or questioning someone's solutions, akhirnya balik ke solusi lo, biar solusi lo yang ditaruh di spotlight gitu. And you should also look for common ground. Jadi kayak jangan cuman don't only look for differences, but also look for points that you can kind of merge the draft resolution in. I think this is something yang also not basic, tapi it's something you should know. Next slide, please. Okay, I think this is my last slide about reading and controlling the council. Tasha already mentioned earlier, the reality is that MUN can be really, really boring. I mean, it's 2-3 days, you hear the same people talking over and over again about the same topic. You have to be able to understand the mood of the council. Tasha tadi udah sempat ngomong sih tentang hal ini. Suaminya kayak kalau if you see the council tuh udah ngomongin definition lama banget. That's all they've been talking about, and like you see everyone's faces udah mulai kayak like you can see that they're bored of the topic. The chairs juga kayak oh I'm so tired. You can see it from people's faces. You can always like try to be interesting. Maybe use a joke, use a hook, and really get people attention again. And just so it's a very good opportunity when people are bored, and you can come up with a good hook because that really puts you back in the spotlight. Lastly, and no, thirdly, is about intonation and body language must be in line with what emotion you want to assert. Kayak there are many very good MUNers, tapi they don't use proper intonation gitu loh. Kayak for example, let's take again the case of preacher there. Let's take the case of let's say 212, the leader, right? I don't want to mention his name again. So for example, kayak dia very emotional, very provoking. Tapi his body language, his intonation is like, guys, kita nggak boleh gini terus. We have to make a change. Yeah, that's not really in line with what you're saying. And that kind of becomes a minus point because, yeah, you need to show that you believe in what you're saying. You need to use proper words, proper diction, sama ya intonation lu juga harus interesting juga. Karena kalau lo datar-datar, if you're just flat throughout your whole speech, yeah, the council, the chairs will also lose interest. And my last point would be about controlling. Kayak, you really need to be able to know where the debate needs to go. Kayak lu tuh udah harus plan. You kind of need to have an idea from the beginning. What are you going to talk about throughout the whole council session? If not, it's just going to be repetitive. And if it's repetitive, yeah, the council will not reach a solution that's comprehensive. So you need to be able to propose motions. You have to be able to be bold enough to say, okay, delegates, we've talked long enough about definition. There are other issues that we should talk about. And that's really controlling the council. So I think, is that our last slide, Tash?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Okay. So maybe I want to add something there. Tadi
Go ahead.
mentioned before. Okay, so I think there's something that we forgot to mention, but is very, very important in delivering your speech, and that is signposting. So in MUN, you want to make sure that your arguments are remembered by both the chairs and also the delegates. You want to make sure that you're able to convey your points clearly. And one way how is to use signposting. So you mentioned we have three arguments. First, blah blah blah. Second, blah blah blah. And third, blah blah blah. That is to give like a differentiation of like how many points you're trying to bring. Because if you present it in like a very long narrative, then the chairs will probably not be able to identify the arguments that you're trying to make. So I think it's very wise to use signposting. Make sure that you actually give like numbering to both your arguments and also your solutions. And that is the first point. And the second point that I want to add is in regards to the debate on draft resolution and working paper. So in my MUN experiences, there's this thing that I noticed happened over and over again. And that is delegates that point out grammatical errors or like choices of dictions of the other blocks draft resolution. So basically, I think I've mentioned before that the time to deliver your speech in MUN is very, very restricted. You really have a very limited amount of time to deliver your argumentations. And so I've also mentioned before that you have to eliminate arguments that you don't think is crucial or vital to the discussion of the topic. And one of those kind of arguments that you should eliminate or just don't bring to the council is to point out grammatical errors made by other delegates within their draft resolution. So let's say that it is the topic is like military topic lah. I don't really do hypo, but let's say it's like a military topic. And one of the countries that are in the other block is Russia. And Russia is the sponsor of the draft resolution. However, they're trying to propose a solution to make their military system, country's military system, more transparent. You know that it is impossible for Russia to agree on doing so because, well, they're very secretive. They won't want other countries to know like their military strategy, weapons, and so on and so forth. So that is one of the biggest flaw. The countries who actually sponsor the draft resolutions have stance that don't actually align with the solution that they're trying to propose. But you also notice that the draft resolution has a lot of grammatical errors. So you have to pick one argumentations that you would like to bring to the council. And certainly the ideal argumentations that you should deliver is about the stance, about the very big flaw that the other block has made. But in MUN conferences, I've noticed that these big flaws are not usually mentioned by delegates. They choose to pick on really, really minor flaws that is not even important to the debate, such as like, well, then again, grammatical errors. So make sure that in the debate of draft resolutions, when you're trying to rebut other delegate solutions, you're trying to compare your solutions to other, make sure that one, you actually point out the biggest mistakes that they've made. And second of all is that when you're comparing, just like what Derek has mentioned before, you have to give reasonings as to why your solution is better. So a lot of practice, a lot of common practice that happen in MUN is that delegates may point out that the solutions provided by the other block is not good enough, is not adequate, and not complemented with with a feasible mechanism. And they will state after that that their block solution is better. However, they don't really mention or elaborate on why their solution is better. So I think it is a very, very common practice in MUN, just stating blatantly that other delegates' solution is worse than yours without actually giving justifications why. So I think that is something that you really need to pay attention on. When you say something, give reasonings to it. I think this also correlates with the RL structure that we've mentioned earlier. I think that's all like the additional points. Sorry if like it's kind of unstructured well, because I don't use like signposting or anything, but yeah, I think that's about it. Okay, so I think that's all for like the formal session of today's training. Derek, you want
Are there any questions, guys?